Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. We're doing a Count Me In with Darcy Vogt Williams and Brian Balmages. So we're gonna hang out today and talk about their brand new book by the same name, Count Me In, and how you can use it in your classroom. You know, get excited about rhythm because we all need it. And I'm Suzanne Whitney. I'm the social media manager for Make Music. So that's who I am, but we're more excited about Brian and Darcy today. So Darcy is the director of bands at Stiles Middle School in Leander ISD down in Texas. I say down because I'm in Colorado, but yes. Maybe over for some of you. She has also had many of her ensembles perform at places like the Midwest Clinic. She is the author of a couple other books, one of which is the Teaching Rhythm Logically, which ties in very nicely with this that we're talking about today. And she's also the producer and host of the After Sectionals podcast. So that's Darcy for you. And then Brian Balmages is an award-winning composer, producer, conductor, performer, all the hats for him. And his commissions go to many different kinds of ensembles, everything from elementary all the way to professional ensembles like the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. So he wears many hats, including working with FJH as the director of instrumental publications. So those are our two guests today. We're really excited to get talking. Before we let them take it away and chat about the book and everything like that, I just want to give you guys a couple of notes. The first of which is just to talk a little bit about our customer success team here at Make Music. What we do is we put on, we create information for you, our customers. We want to make sure that you have lots of information, both about our products, but also about music education in general. We know that there's such a wonderful word of mouth that helps educators learn, helps them find resources, and we want to be one of those resources for you guys. So we also take feedback from our customers and bring it to our product team. So we are your advocates. So if you have questions about our products or how they work, then let us know. We want to tell our production teams what you guys want in our products. So we present at clinics like Midwest. We have webinars like this. So we're trying to provide you with resources all across the board. The next thing I just want to mention is that if you guys have questions during this webinar, then I'm going to go ahead and ask that you put them in the chat. If you see down at the bottom of your screen, there should be a chat option, and you can send them directly to me. My name, again, is Suzanne Whitney, so you can find me in the chat and send those questions to me, and I will ask them to Brian and Darcy at the end. So that's all we got with this for today. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you can see.
I'm gonna let my dog in.
Oh.
My dog wants to come in.
Wants to come be a part of the magic.
For an answer. I know it. Okay.
Perfect. All righty. So I'm gonna let you two take it away. We're looking at the Count Me In book. We were just talking about it. I have a copy of it here, which is pretty cool. It's just brand new in SmartMusic. I think last week we just got it in. So this is something that you can use in your classrooms with just the book. If you are a SmartMusic user, you can use this in SmartMusic. So we're pretty stoked to have it in here. So
we're stoked that y'all picked it up. That's really cool.
Absolutely. So I'll let you guys take it away and talk a little bit about the book and how you can use it in your classes and stuff.
Yeah, okay. I'm actually going to jump in here for a second just because I wanted to kind of let people know how this thing came to be. So Darcy, I guess I've known you for a long time now.
Yeah.
It started off when when you had just been at Stiles for a little bit, you and Jenna, and I guess we had kind of met through email prior to that before you both moved to Stiles. And then I went to work with your band, and I remember at that time you were, it was a work in progress. You had just gotten there, and you were in the process of building. It still was really good, but
sure, we were just a little baby school.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I just kind of watched your program explode. Of course, you went to Midwest and played one of my pieces there. I got a chance to work with them, and then of course I got a chance to come down and work with you guys separately from that when I came to work with you guys and Robert's group, and it was like the who's who of Leand. It was great. And so that's when you kind of go down there and you say, all right, every group that I see, I'm going to try just not to mess it up because they're already doing just fine without me. And so got a chance to be on her After Sectionals podcast. And the thing that I've always been really, I'm going to just get on the Darcy train for a minute if I can, but the thing that I've always really loved about Darcy, her band, her program, Jenna, Alice, like the whole thing is that they're all amazing teachers, and Darcy does such a great job at explaining and making things available to people that might not have the same instinct initially, or something that of how to teach something or how to get it through to a kid. She breaks things down, and her kids don't drink magic water, right? I mean, she has
absolutely not.
They have water, right? And so for me, it was a very natural thing. Of course, her rhythm book really was taking off, teaching rhythm logically. And so many people were using it. People who I didn't even think you even knew who you were. And they were like, oh yeah, I love her book. And it was just clear. And so I asked her years ago, I said, do you ever think there could be a student component to this? And she said, I really think there could be, but we need to really think about it. And so we've thought about it for at least a year and a half. And then she said, yeah, I think so. And I said, great, let's do it. And we just took off. And I really love the book. I love everything about it. I've always been good with rhythm, but I've never been good at explaining it. I've never been good at explaining it. And if somebody said, teach rhythm, I would just, okay, this is an eighth note. And there was no concept of how to do it. And so her book did such a great job for teachers, and we thought, how great would it be if the kids just had something right in front of them, jump onto and go from there. So that's kind of how the whole thing came to be.
Yeah, I think that like kind of jumping and tagging on that, like I think one of the things that rhythm, you saying that like if you had to teach it, it would be very strange, but like it is so natural to us by the time we get to this point in our lives. Like by the time you have, your bachelor's or your master's, or I mean, heck, your doctorate in music, like you've been doing it for so long, especially if you're not from Texas and you've been doing it since like 4th grade. You've been playing and reading rhythms and that kind of stuff for so long that it becomes almost too second nature, where you don't even really think about why how it works. Anytime I've ever talked about how like that book got started, it was, I was teaching the very, very bottom band at a program that wasn't super stellar at the time. And I was seeing these major knowledge gaps in the band that I was working with, and really having to figure out, well, how do I say it to this group of kids that's going to make them understand? Because your top kids are always going to figure out what's going on. You never have to explain it to your awesome kids. It's all of those bottom of the middle kids to the bottom that you really have to figure out like how to word things and how to lead them to information. Because any of us that are teachers know that if you just tell a kid something, they are not going to remember it. You have to lead them to it in a way that lets them draw their own conclusions, because when they do that, then they're like committing it to memory in a practical way. And so, after years and years and years of figuring out what practical approaches I could use to bring my kids to understanding, a quarter note doesn't just get one beat. Like, let's build off of that and figure out why all of this stuff works. And when you understand the why, that's when kids truly understand it. And that's when they can truly become self-sufficient. It's when your kids come up to you and say, Miss, how does this go? That that there's a major learning gap for your kids. And, it's not fun to have to spoon feed to every single note and rhythm to your kids. Like, you want to get them to a point where, you know, you can send them home with a song and they aren't just like plunking it out or looking it up on YouTube to figure out how it goes. You know, when your kids can take it home and like they understand it so well that they can teach themselves the music, then you as a band director get to do the cool stuff. You know, I didn't go to college because I really wanted to teach how half notes are counted. I went to college because I wanted to make music out of those half notes. And so when you put that burden, when you put that responsibility on the kids of understanding how it goes so that they can teach themselves, then that makes more time available to me as a teacher to, you know, stretch those quarter notes and worry about the tone that goes with them and where is that half note going. And it just makes my job more fun when the kids know what's going on. And once I figured out that I had like a formula of how to teach the stuff that worked, of course I'm going to make it available to anybody else. And I kind of joke about this, but it's true. Like, I always kind of figure that like your kid is going to end up moving to styles because everybody somehow moves to styles eventually. And I want to make sure that when your kid shows up at my school, they understand how that stuff is going. So I made all of that information available to the band directors out in the band director world. So.
And what I loved about it, and so every time I approach one of these books, right, I've done this with Darcy. I did an intonation thing with Robert Herrings at Henry. And every time I do something, I find myself, there are things, again, that I intuitively understand that you talked about. But when it comes to teaching and explaining, I was lacking the method for doing that. And one of the things that you really helped me figure out was number one, the sequence of things, which I had in my mind, oh, we're going to do it this way because most method books do it this way. And then you said, well, I think we should do it this way because the reality is kids struggle with this. And we can go through the progression. That's fine in a minute. But everything you said to me, I was like, oh, that really makes sense to me. It really makes sense. And of course, for you, it makes sense because you've tried to teach it this way. You've tried to teach it that way. Sure. Like the whole dotted quarter note thing. And you said, oh, no, I never, or dotted half notes. You said, I always teach it in 4/4 time before in 3/4. I believe that was, and going through that. And at first I thought, well, wait a minute, that's not, you know, what we did in the method. And that's what most, and then you explained why. It was like, okay, it all starts to make sense. And coming through that. And then the other thing that I really got from you on this was the idea of being consistent, right? A great example, which we can get into, Suzanne, in a little bit, but I put out a feeler because I was, we were in the process of dealing with triplets. Do you remember this? And it was 8-note triplets. And yeah, that was the one. And I said, all right, folks, you know, I'm working on something, and how do you all count triplets? Because I had told Darcy, you do it 1 lolly, 2 lollies, like, and I was like, oh, I mean, that's fine, but I mean, I've heard all these other ways, so I'm gonna get advice from all the directors out there, and I probably got like 40 different responses, right? Everything from like Chicago or you know, something to like baloney, and then, you know, I got a couple friends that some of the, which I really respect, that Sylvia, I got 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, and that all seemed great until you got to the situation with now you have quarter note triplets, right? And so then I'm like, okay, so what do you do then? Do you just slow it down? And so then Darcy said, well, if you're using 1 la li, then it just becomes 1 li la, because you can actually tie it. And all these things that I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, wow, this really makes sense. And she's like, yes, it does. And so the other alternative would be like 1 lep tree, 2 plet tree, and it doesn't work. And so all of those things, the consistency, the approach, the whole thing made such clear sense to me. I'm using it with my son. He's really latching on to it. He's in 4th grade. So he's latching on to it, and he used it as part of, he wrote his first piece, the Colin song. Colin, very exciting. But he was able to really think about rhythm and how it all interacts. So it was really, really cool.
That's neat. Like, I think the consistency thing, I think, is really, it's so super important, not just in like the consistency of the words you use, but like the consistency of like doing it regularly. But like with the words thing, I want to talk about that first and jump off of what you just said. But like, you know, there's so many people that have really latched on to whether you say one T ta, whether you say one eanda or whatever, you know, band directors have very clearly latched onto some system like that. And then it was funny on your Facebook post when it got to the triplets, how crazy some of the answers were. Because like everybody, it just seems very interesting that you're willing to commit to making a kid learn how to say one eanda, but then saying one lolly was too confusing. And it's actually like, you're almost like breaking your own rules and teaching the kids that it's harder than it actually is. When if you just give them a really basic system that follows the exact same rules, whether it's duple or triple meter or, you know, whatever it might be, or duple or triple subdivision, like the more it can be the same, the more it is going to make sense to your kids. And as soon as there's like a weirdo rule for it, like for example, you get to some of the weird things. When we played at Midwest, we played a piece called San Antonio Dances. It's a Frank DeKelly piece. And it has all sorts of fivelets and septuplets in it. And I don't have a good way to count it. So like we came up with the dumbest ways to count it. But, you know, here I am like this counting like hardcore person with my kids. But like, since there isn't really a good way to count some of that stuff latched onto the kids less strongly than anything else did. I mean, like up to the very end, because there wasn't like a clear, this is absolutely ridiculous, but this is how we counted part of San Antonio Dances. We counted it 7 up is awesome. That's how we counted it. But the reason I had them do that is because I needed some word that went on up so that they knew when the foot happened up. I needed something to happen where they felt the beat. So that's why we ended up going 7 up, and it put the up on the up. Because I needed something for them to physically latch onto, which I guess that did stick in their heads for a long time, because for years I heard that stupid rhythm coming out of the band hall, kind of like Careless Whisper. But like anytime you can have consistency, it is going to make more sense to your kids. And so when you're having to resort to, and there's nothing wrong with using like 1 potato, 2 potato, or Sylvia, or whatever you do, as long as it is very consistent. But the more you can make your kids follow specific rules for rhythm, like your kids aren't stupid. You would be amazed at how smart your kids are. And when you give them a set of rules and you explain to them why the rules are these, they will follow them and it will make more sense. Anyway.
Right. So see, here's the thing that really connected with me, right? I know we haven't talked about the book yet, but I'm going to just say that, you know, the thing that really connected with me was, okay, triplets are a great example. And so 1 triplet, 2, whatever it might be. Then you got into 6/8 time. And when Darcy was saying, well, if we go 1 lolly 2, that will still work, right? Mm-hmm. 1 li 2, li 3 lolly 4, 1 lolly 2, la 3 li, and all that was fine. Versus you can't go 1 plet 2 plet 3 triplet 4.
Sure.
You can't do that. So then you have to change your system again, or you wind up with a bunch of kids that just can't play in 6/8. And so heaven forbid that would ever happen. And so all of those things to me just made so much sense. It started with the quarter note triplet. That's where it really started. And then we got into 6/8, and I kept saying, well, how do you count it? And she just kept saying the same way. And I suddenly realized, oh, look at that. She's right.
Well, it just simplifies it for the kids. The kids don't have to learn a new rule. Mm-hmm. And the point that you make about the like, what did you just count? 1 lit 2 lit 3 triple lit makes sense when it's 3 in a row. But as soon as the rhythm changes, then it's just gibberish. And if it's just going to be gibberish, why not make it consistent gibberish that you can use in all meters, whether it be 6/8 or 4/4 or whatever. Anyway.
I kind of like that. 1 let trip, let 3, let trip, let trip, let. Okay, anyway.
I have this, kind of off on a small tangent, but I have like this theory that if you add let to the end of any word, it makes it cuter. So like if you have a pig, let, now suddenly it's adorable. If you have, you know, we call our dogs, we have little mini dachshunds, so they're doglets, so they're instantly cuter. And I was telling this to my kids one time, and this kid raised their hand, and they're like, what about poop? And I was like, pooplet sounds pretty cute. I think it sounds adorable.
True. You could use that for your tuba players who don't like to play whole notes. Then they're playing a whole it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Anyway.
So back to the book. Anyway,
bird.
The other point of consistency that I wanted to talk about, which is probably the more important one, because like one of the things that when you and I were building this book is we were very clear that we weren't going to like specify any sort of counting system, because I don't really, like I have always said, I don't care what kind of counting system you use with your kids, as long as you're using a counting system with them all the time, the same system all the time, and all the time being the important part. Like it needs to be happening every day. Like every day your kids should be counting something, because, you know, every time you do it, it commits to memory. It becomes, you know, that internal structure that we as musicians already have. And part of what we built this on and what teaching rhythm logically is all about is like ways that you incorporate rhythm as a fundamental for your kids every single day. Because I mean, you know, like Texas especially, we are like the concert F people, but like knowing when that concert F happens is equally as important. Like it doesn't matter if it's beautiful if it doesn't happen at a specific time. And so, you know, with my own kids, we try very hard to make sure that the kids are counting in isolation every day. Now that could mean charts, that could mean lines out of Count Me In, that could be literally just making sure that if we're in the beginner book or if we're, you know, in full band, I'm having the kids count a section, but they are having to like audiate rhythm to me every single day. And they do that, you know, from 6th grade all the way through 8th grade. And then my kids get up to the high school and the high school band directors are like, oh my gosh, your kids read extremely well. Well, yeah, because they know when the note happens. Very, very infrequently is the problem the kids recognizing what the note is. Like I see it on the 4th line of treble clef. I know it's a D, and your kids probably are going to know how to finger that note. But when does the D happen? That's usually where the breakdown for your kids being good readers is the timing. And so making sure that your kids are audibly counting, both with, you know, numbers and a counting system. If you're a count and clap group, great. If it's a doing rhythm on sizzles, you know, like your or air playing or whatever, like isolating that rhythm aside from the fingers, isolating that rhythm aside from the tone, to really make sure that your kids understand the timing of it. I think that is a fundamental that gets missed a lot.
I agree. And I think the other thing that we set out to do, and so I always like to say, you know, the majority of this book stems from teaching rhythm logically, obviously, because that's your thing. And you have a great system, and maybe you can show this to everybody, of showing articulation, the articulated part of a note versus the silent part of a note, right? The sustain part.
Sure.
And then we also came up with a way to show sustain itself, because one of the things that I struggle with as an honor band conductor is, or anybody conductor really, is coming up with kids that see a long note and they play that note maybe at the right time, but they have no idea how long. They check out while they're playing it, right? Sure. And they just play a long note, and then the next note is never in time because they don't engage the rest of that note. And this is probably the singular biggest problem with percussionists, right? They have a whole note cymbal playing, and they crash them, and then they don't engage the rest of that measure. So anything after that whole note becomes a feeling, right? We try to feel where it is. And so we can talk about kind of the way we show that, and some of the way we lift the numbers, just some really great things.
So is there a way, Suzanne, is there a way that if I hold up this book, it's going to not flip it?
That's, I think because you're on a webcam, it's probably going to flip it.
Okay.
I can
people
pull
are
up an
smart.
exercise if you want. I can pull up an exercise in SmartMusic so they can see it on the screen.
Does it have all of the writing in it that we have? Like the numbers and the arrows? Okay. So if you want to pull up like lesson 1, line 1, we can show them, you know, the really basics, and then we can progress a little off of that. So building off of what Brian was just saying. So one of the things that teaching rhythm logically stresses, and then we were able to pull into Count Me In, is how the kids actually write on their music, because I think it's really important that you need to hit absolutely every single way that a kid learns. And I mean, sure, this is old school information, but you know, we've all learned in our college classes that some kids learn audibly, some kids learn visually, some kids learn by doing. And so both Count Me In and Teaching Rhythm Logically both really encourage you to make your kids do all three every day. So if you're looking at your screen, so you notice that number one, we're having the kids, you know, label their numbers on the notes. We have the kids show what their foot is doing. Now, I don't have my kids write the arrows on everything that we do. We do initially at the very beginning when we're learning how to count rhythms. And then later on, and even in Count Me In, it shows that we kind of wean off of that until it becomes really important again, like with dotted quarter notes and whatnot. But one of the things on this lesson one that I want to point out is that, so like when they get to the rest, this is how we have the kids notate that a note is going to be, or that a beat is going to be silent. We want the kids to know that like those numbers are still there, those beats are still there. And so we show that they're silent by just shrinking them. And then we draw a slash through the note. And that tells the kids that the number is present, but it's going to be silent. The slash represents the silence. So now, Suzanne, if you could actually pull up lesson 2, that first line. So in lesson 2, we're showing that we're teaching the kids to subdivide those beats. Still, even now when we're teaching them half notes, they're subdividing what is inside of that sustained note. And so, like for example, it's a little slightly different in our book. But
just
if
a tiny bit, yeah.
On the half note, well, actually, can you shoot back to me for a second, Suzanne, and then we can show the SmartMusic version. So if you're looking here, so
it's
what we have
flipped. It's not flipped at all. It's perfect.
Oh, it's not flipped.
Is
There
it?
you go.
That's amazing. Okay, so what we have them do is to show the sustain, and a lot of beginner books will do this. They'll have the 1 maybe, and then they have this line that shows that the sound is going to continue on, and then you'll have the 3 and the sound continues on. But we go through, and I'm still having the kids subdivide those individual beats within the sustain. So they're still thinking where 2 is. They're still thinking where 4 is. And we teach the kids to go ahead and like this may seem super type A, and that's okay. We're musicians. We are type A. That's why we're good. Like I want the kids to put the 2 where it belongs. The 2 doesn't belong over here and it doesn't belong over there. It belongs right in the middle because that's where 2 happens. So we're going through and we're teaching the kids that B is still there. Notice that there's not a slash through it because it's not silent. So that's how we kind of differentiate between a silent beat and a note that is inside, or a beat that's inside of another note. And then they're visualizing the sustain with the line that goes through. And honestly, that was never, that little line may seem like totally normal. It was something that I never did before. And when Brian showed me that, like, it makes total sense. Like, so it's combined.
That's my contribution. That line is my contribution to the book. Everything else is,
No, but it's like, but it also, it's just another one of those things that makes sense. Like it's showing the kid 1 is continuing, but what's inside of 1, that little 2 is inside of 1. And it's just a visualization for the kids as they're learning how to count these larger notes, to know what's inside of this. And this is like, this is maybe jumping over to progression really quickly, but, you know, both Teaching Rhythm Logically and Count Me In, it specifically starts with quarter notes. Now, most beginner method books are going to start you off with whole notes, which makes sense if you're teaching tone first. Of course, you don't want first of all, you probably don't want to teach articulation on the first day that you're playing. And number 2, you're probably wanting your kid to play something longer than, say, 1 beat at a time when you're learning how to make a sound. So it makes sense that you would start your kids with those larger notes, like a whole note. Most beginner books do start with a whole note. However, if you're trying to get your kids to understand rhythm, like, I don't know, it's like counting by 5s. You would never teach a kindergarten kid to count by 5s. You would never be teaching your toddler, 5, 10, 15, 20. That's not the first thing, because that's having them like internalize all of these numbers that are really important to know where they happen. So if you're starting your kids with a quarter note, you're teaching them the basic fundamental building block of all rhythms. and then you can build off of there. And that's what we did in Count Me In, where it's going through and it's starting with that basic building block, that quarter note, that one count beat. And then it's building off of there and allowing the kids to see where each of these beats happen, so that they're not thinking in clumps of beats. They're thinking.
Right, and you should mention also that the premise of the book, right? That it's completely non-pitched. So there are ensembles in the book, but the whole premise of this entire rhythmic thing, both the one that you've done on teaching rhythm logically, and then also with Count Me In, is the idea that really stayed with me. You told me, you said, look, I'm always having kids working on rhythms that they're not going to see for another 3-4 weeks.
Yeah. And I think that's extremely important. Like we are very much all about teaching rhythms before the kids ever see it in music. Like I want to isolate rhythm so that we're just working on one skill at a time. And it's not just rhythm that we do this with. I mean, it's everything. My kids learn how to finger notes before we ever play them at the beginning of the year. But so we go through and we front load the rhythm theory with the kids all year. So like my kids by Christmas, my beginners are counting 16th note rhythms. They're not going to see 16th note rhythms in their music for a long time. But when they finally do see it in music, it's not scary. We've been counting these 16th notes for dadgum forever. And when they finally have to put it on the instrument, like the fear and the unknown and the strangeness of it, like all we're doing is adding some fingers and air to it. That's all we're doing. Nothing's different. We've been counting 16th notes since Christmas. We finally are seeing it in music. Piece of cake. Does anybody not understand how measure 2 goes? No, let's just add some fingers to it. And it takes the mystery and it takes the anxiety away from, the black notes that we see in music.
And I really like that. Yeah, I mean, we get pretty, well, I used to say we get pretty complex, right? And then I was saying, yeah, well, this is getting pretty complex. And I, in my mind, had envisioned like, okay, we're really advanced, right? And then I mentioned multimeter, and then Darcy says, well, I was more envisioning this as a book for beginners. And then I thought, wow, she really goes pretty far with these kids. But again, it's not hard to go 1 T teta 2 T or
sure.
one lolly. I mean, it doesn't matter. That's easy. I mean, any kid can really do that. And I think it just really made me understand, like, it really is easy to do. And I think with the ensemble pieces that we do, it makes it fun for them too. Because the trick is, right, if you're going to teach rhythm, you got to do it in a fun way. And you should talk about some of the games that you play with your kids, sure. Because I mean, you somehow get kids excited about, yay, we're starting with rhythm today. And they're like legitimately excited. It's crazy.
Yes. So we do start most of our classes with rhythm, and we start with rhythm almost all year. Like I walked in the other day and the very first thing we did was chart 13. And we counted that, and then we started our long tones for the day. But one of the ways that we keep the kids excited is, they're beginners. They're still kids. Like I know that we envision ourselves as like molding, the art world of sound. And we take our jobs very seriously, but they're still kids, and kids love games. And so, we don't even have like a plethora of games that we play. Like every time I tell the kids we're going to play Mess Up Dropout, they're excited. And it doesn't matter if they're 6th graders or 8th graders. If I played Mess Up Dropout with my 8th graders on the very last day of middle school, they would be pumped. But we do this with rhythm all the time, where we go through and like, here, I'll just pick one. Let's say that we're on chart 7, which is 8th notes and 8th rest. So I'll go through, and I'm not going to do the whole page. And in fact, I'll say this right now, like rarely, if I'm doing rhythm with my kids, am I using the entire chart at once. Most of the time when I'm doing this, I'm doing it in 4 to 8 measure chunks. And you don't have to just do them like horizontally. Like any way you can jack with a kid's brain, it's going to stick better. So like we do lots of line 1 and line 2, but we also do a lot of column counting. And I'll say, okay, take your finger, put it in measure 1, drag it down the page. That's column 1. I want to count chart 7, column 1. And so we'll go through, or lesson 7, column 1. And we'll go through and we'll count it down the page. We'll go through and I'll say, okay, let's count line 1, but this time we're going to count it backwards. We're going to start, well, I'll get back to that in a second. because counting backwards confuses children, but tying it backwards or air playing it backwards or sizzling, there's no numbers involved. It's very easy. Counting backwards ruins lives. Don't do that. But we'll go through and maybe we'll only count the odd lines, or maybe we'll count only the even measures. One of the things that the kids always, this seems so silly, but kids get excited every time I say, let's zigzag it. So like zigzagging, and you'll notice, any of y'all that use this, we give little bonus ideas down at the bottom of the page of other ways where you can make using the lessons more interesting. I'll say, okay, guys, we're going to zigzag it. And zigzagging means we're going to count measure 1 of line 1, measure 2 of line 2, measure 3 of line 3, measure 4 of line 4, and then we're going to go back down the page so that we're going to zigzag across the page. And again, that seems so silly, but to an 11-year-old, it's weird, and weird is always fun. So like just doing really simple things like that make it more interesting. And honestly, it tells you kind of the brain speed of your kids too. It's like I could almost separate my kids into ability-based bands on the 3rd day of school when I ask them to zigzag. And then I'm like, your honors band next year, I already know it. But again, it's just giving them silly ways they can do this stuff. Mess up dropout is like, say, maybe I would say, okay, we're going to do line 6 and 7. And I'm going to start it with the metronome at 72. And if you count it 100% perfectly at the very end of line 7, you're going to raise your hand. And everybody who's still in because they counted it perfectly, I'm going to crank up the metronome 10 more clicks. And then if you count it perfectly at the end, raise your hand. And then I'm going to crank up the metronome 10 more clicks. And again, you're trying to get it to where there's only one kid left. And they take a whole lot of pride in this. And sometimes I'll let the kid that won, they'll get to decide what we do mess up dropout on next. But stuff like that is fun. Another way that you can, another game that we play with our kids a lot is called Don't Break the Chain, which is hard, but it also tells you a lot about what your kids are doing inside of their brain while they're playing this game. So like kid 1, you go in order of your kids, how they're sitting. So like kid 1 is going to count measure 1. Then kid 2 is going to count measure 2. Kid 3 is going to count measure 3. And that may seem really like easy. You're only in charge of 1, but you're also having to like internalize what the other kids are counting. So you're having to follow along. You're having to time yourself. You're having to come in at the right time. If you come in at the wrong time, your team automatically is done with that round. So like, for example, when I play Don't Break the Chain, this is a team sport. So like row 1 is going to be a team. And so you get points based on how many measures you count 100% correctly, timing and word-wise. And if they get to the end of the row, then they have to bounce back and go again. So all of those kids that were like 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm measure 5. Well, guess what? You're not measure 5 anymore. So were you really listening to your neighbor to know when to come in? So it's like it incorporates listening skills, it incorporates timing, it incorporates counting rests. Like all of these higher level skills you can do with lesson number 3.
Right. And the cool thing about that is, I mean, how many times have you do a lot of honor bands also? And I mean, forget about honor band. Who cares about if it's honor band or on an orchestra or whatever? But how many times am I working with an ensemble where I say, are you listening to them? Like, did you hear what they were doing? Did you hear the tempo that they were at? Were you able to jump in? Because I mean, how many pieces do they go, you know, between the saxophones and the clarinets or whatever it might be? And it's completely different. So this really helps them that there's a lot of ensemble. And I think I didn't really appreciate the amount of benefit to ensemble playing that came out of these games and just from the duets and the trios and things that we put into the book. There's a lot, and it was all without instruments, which I thought was cool. And of course they can play if they want to.
Sure.
You know, maybe not on day 1, just day 2.
The thing that I think that's cool about this being on SmartMusic now is like I'll tell the kids, okay, guys, tomorrow we're going to play Mess Up Dropout on chart 7, which chart 7 is, or lesson 7 is hard. It's what all those 8th rests and weird places. So I'll say, okay, we're going to play Mess Up Dropout on the last 2 lines. You need to go home for homework and you need to figure out how to count the last 2 lines. And then tomorrow in class, we're going to play Mess Up Dropout on it. And, you know, you just kind of hope that the kids really paid attention in class and they know how to go home and apply what we learned to those bottom 2 lines, which are the trickier ones. But now that it's on SmartMusic, like the kids can go home and do it and the computer's going to tell them if they're wrong or not, which that's really cool. Cause now that's another tool that the kids have in their belt of accountability and did I do it right? And man, wouldn't we have all been amazing if there had been somebody sitting in our house years ago telling us if we were doing it right or not?
But we should also mention that those two lines were a lot harder at first until you looked at them. And after she stopped laughing and told me I was ruining lives, she said, I think the quote was, "This will destroy children's lives."
Yes, that's exactly right. There were a couple of measures in there that, like Brian would send me these lessons to look at. And most of the time I would just like look at them and be like, okay, it's fine. But then like from a teacher brain, like I'm looking at it and I know how, like, let's be real. Let's talk tuba class. I know which measures need to be at the very bottom of the chart for tuba class. Like this measure is too darn complex to be in line 2. I need to have been able to like really nail in these concepts for the first 6 lines. Let's put that at the very bottom. And that can be like a bonus for them.
Yeah.
So like we spent quite a bit of time going through and like, I'd email you and be like, no. I think that this measure, this really needs to belong down here just so that it's progressing more logically in the kids' brains.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of them were, this measure needs to not belong.
There were a couple of those, yeah.
But I'm just excited that I got it to that point. That was my goal.
I think the book came out really good. Yeah.
What's that?
Your goal was to ruin lives?
Hey man, that's
my goal was to eventually get to something that Darcy said, okay, that's too much. That was my goal.
There you go.
I always tell the kids, and I'm only halfway serious, but like I'll tell the kids that when I was trying to decide what I was going to be in life, I really only had 2 choices, and it was evil dictator or band director, and there were no job openings for the first one, so I had to go into the band world, and this is just as satisfying.
It's true. We get to ruin lives on a daily basis.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
So I felt like, I just said the way the whole book came together was great. And then the one thing that I added in, the two, I guess the sustain thing was something that was really important to me. And again, that came from that big place of kids just getting lost in La La Land during a whole note. Mm-hmm. The other thing was this idea of adding in a little bit of mixed meter. Not only mixed meter, but irregular meter.
Yes.
Because,
which I had never included in any of my stuff.
No, I know. You had taught it, but I guess you just, again, you come up with ways to teach it when you need to teach it, right?
Sure.
And so maybe 7-Up was really cool one year and for the whole year. And so we tried to come up with certain ways to explain it and teach it, because I mean, kids are going to encounter 5/8, they're going to encounter 7/8, and so we touched on that, which I thought was great.
Yeah. Well, and that's a total addition for my kids, because now I have this readily available, chart ready to go. Because I mean, a lot of times what would happen is I would get to, what is that piece that we played? Undertow, that John Mackey piece, Undertow, which is a whole lot of irregular rhythms and whatnot. And going through, so like when I was teaching that years ago, then I needed to sit down and I needed to, like, I got on Finale and typed out my chart, and I don't need to do that anymore because now it's in this book. So that's time saving for even me now. I don't have to reinvent stuff. When you originally said that you wanted to include that stuff, I was like, but it makes total sense, because like now the book is usable for not just your 11-year-old or your 10-year-old or your 9-year-old or whenever beginner band starts. Like the book is really, it has stuff in it that's for absolutely everyone. I mean, I would even go so far as to say a lot of high school programs are using the back half of this book, or should be.
Well, I think that's really important, because I mean, I have friends that teach, I have friends that teach 4th graders or even 3rd grade strings, and they're able to use this book. Sure. But I also have friends that have advanced middle school groups and high school groups, and they might jump around in it a little bit more, but they use the book, and it's not designed to be a kid book. Like, this is an elementary level thing.
This is a music book. This is a musician book.
Exactly. And I mean, I've how many groups have I heard play inaccurate rhythm? Or if they're even sometimes they play the right rhythm, but with inaccurate time. I mean, the dotted eighth, 16th note, the quintessential example, that half the groups that I do it, they swing it, right? And so hopefully SmartMusic didn't put a jazz drummer swinging behind the 6/8, the dotted eighth stuff. Okay, good. So, but that was another thing that I thought is a great advantage of getting kids to really understand that bum, ba, bum, ba, 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 bum, so that they can really.
That's what we did in saxophone class today, a ton today. 1 2 tattoo, 1 2 tattoo, finding where those beats actually happen.
And I like that counting system. The more you do it, the more I like it. You know, I was a 1D and a 2 guy, but the 1 2 tattoo, that's getting them the tongue.
It's articulation, and it's clean articulation.
It is.
Who was it? There was some band director. There was like a Texas band director that was telling me not too long ago that they had always been the one anda, and they finally were like, "Fine, I'll try it this year." And they're like, I was really surprised by how just saying 1 T teta, like we didn't change how we taught articulation, but just having them say 1 T teta truly cleaned up their articulation, because even before we played it, they heard how clean it was. Mm-hmm. And so then when they played it and it didn't sound as clean, they knew it was wrong.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yep. That's fantastic. And her group is fantastic because of it.
Well, we
tried. Which I should congratulate you on finishing your honor band recording.
Oh my gosh. I congratulate me for finishing my honor band recording. Hopefully.
Don't know, right? In Texas, it's a big thing. Honor band is a big thing, and a lot of the really good Texas honor bands record themselves. I'm glad I'm talking about it, and I don't live anywhere near there, nor have I ever done it. But and then it becomes this big, I guess competition is a good word to put it.
Competition too. That's how Texas decides who gets to play at our music educators convention.
Right.
You don't get to play at the TMEA convention unless you won the honor band contest. And it is very, I love Midwest. I am thrilled to have been invited there. I hope I get invited back. TMEA is crazy hard to win. Like it's an intensity that is different. And
right.
We only have to do it every 2 years, which is good because it gives you a year to breathe.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Yes.
Amen. And then you get 6 years to not do it, right? If you get it.
Yes. Yep. You get a long break.
Every 3-year rule.
Yep.
So do we want to open it up for questions? Do we want to?
Yeah.
How do you want to do this?
All right. If anybody, I've been collecting a couple of questions here during while you guys were talking. If anybody else has other questions, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can select the chat option at the bottom down here. Oh, pup time. Just go ahead and select the chat option down at the bottom and send it your question to me, Suzanne Whitney, and then I will shoot it on over to Brian and Darcy. But let me take a look here.
Everybody wants to know what my favorite 90s alternative song was. And of course, guys, it's Mr. Jones by Counting Crows.
It's an excellent one. So we've got one question that just came in that we'll go with first is John wants to see a few more sample lines progressing through the book just to see the process, I think.
Sure. Do you want me to hold them up on the book or do you want to actually open stuff up?
Well, you're quick. You can just
I can hold this up. Okay, so
I'd love to show some of the 16th notes and stuff, and but you go do you do you.
Okay, so
that's what makes you special.
We go through and it progresses through. Like so, here we have by lesson 4, we've got through dotted half notes.
And we'll remind them that we use the dotted half notes in 4/4 time before 3/4 because you said that really messes everybody says it's hard, but it's not hard for them to count it in 4/4 time to understand it gets easy.
It's not. In fact, actually, I think 3/4 is a really hard time signature for kids to feel because there's just not a kid that's listening to the radio is not listening to 3/4 time. Mm-hmm. Like the music that most kids are going to be listening to and, filling their brains with for most of their life is not in 3/4. So you try to introduce the dotted half note, which like is a concept that you really want to make sure that you hit correctly so that they understand the concept of a dot and not that it just adds a beat. But then you put it in 3/4 time, which the kids don't naturally feel anyway. 3/4 is hard. Speaking of 3/4, here's an ensemble in 3/4. We have pages throughout the book that give the kids duets and trios to work on so that the kids are having like an ensemble feel. Hey, Tiffany. Hey, thanks for the peanuts and the saltwater taffy. I have been eating saltwater taffy all week, so when my pants don't fit, it's Tiffany's fault. We go through and it's got eighth notes. It's hitting home that you need to know how this fits in with the foot tap. I'm a strong believer that you need to require your kids to do the foot tap from day one. It is not too hard. Here's an example of how we're teaching how to do ties and how they need to be notating those subdivisions within the larger beat.
I love that. So we're always raising the subdivision. I mean, that's huge because I'll tell you the one thing that always frustrated me, you can keep going through the book, but the one thing that I always got frustrated with is that we would say write out the counting, right? And so if there were some 16th notes, you would just see 1 E enda, 2 E enda, 3 E enda, 4 E enda, and the next measure, 1 E enda, 2 E enda, and they would just write out all the counts. And there was no concept of understanding where does the note start.
Sure.
And what's inside the note, how long is it sustained, and how do we show emphasis on like 1 D and a 2? Because you would just see
Yes.
1 D and a 2 E and a 3 instead of 1 and 2, a 3. And so this showed that, and that was huge for me. That kind of was a big deal for me.
The bigs and littles, I really make sure that the kids understand when a number or a syllable like te or whatnot, they understand when it's big because that's representing when we're actually articulating it, when a note actually starts, and the small things are all built inside so that they're seeing exactly what you're saying. When does it actually start, and what should we be thinking about as we are sustaining this note? I think that's incredibly important and is a huge problem when you get to actually playing. You know, like, are you keeping energy during that sustain? Are you letting it die because you're not really thinking about what's happening in that note anyway? Here is an example.
Tiffany sent you peanuts?
She did. She came and observed a whole bunch of Leander schools, and as a thank you for letting her spend the day with us, she sent me the best peanuts I have ever eaten. They are Virginia peanuts, and they're the crispiest peanuts I've ever had.
I worked with her band and I didn't get any peanuts.
Sorry, Tiffany.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
sometimes you find out who your real friends are. Okay, anyway, go ahead.
You're the most delicious peanuts ever. Okay, so here we're teaching syncopation and
it's too late, Tiffany. You've already hurt my feelings.
Yeah. We show them how to do it with ties and how the foot is affected with this. And then when we show them what it looks like when you write syncopation, how it's really going to, we actually have these dotted lines that drop down so that the kids see that it's the same thing. Like, we taught it with a concept that they already understand, because I just showed you the page where we were teaching about ties. And now we're taking a skill that they already understand and we're applying it to something that looks weird, but they're still seeing where their foot is when all of these notes happen. You know, they're going to be dropping the countdown, and we kind of guide you through that. Again, this is the student companion to the teaching rhythm logically stuff. So all the stuff that you're taught how to do in the teacher's version, now your kids have something to physically work with. So you're not copying 40 billion pages, and now they have it on SmartMusic so that they can go home and do it and have somebody checking in with them. Here's some of the 16th pages.
And we should mention too, you had me write in a lot of things. Like sometimes you would take the arrows out and you would say, you would write in, like, example, said, where is your foot while you're counting?
Yep, like right here. And and that's going to prompt you as the teacher to say, hey kids, grab your pencils. We're going to write in the downs and ups for this.
Right, and the third measure of the one right below it, and where it says write the counting below, that's a tricky measure, right? And so I think one of the things that you really pushed in this was, first of all, we're not going to include counting for every line. I mean, that was a huge thing, right?
Yes.
We're not going to include that for every line. We're going to leave a lot out. And so that's either going to make the kids write it, but I think the idea was, look, we're going to show you how to count it, but pretty quickly, we want you in every lesson to get to a point where you don't have to write it down.
Sure.
You can internalize it and just count it.
Yeah, we're teaching you how to read the code, and you have a guide up, you know, in the first 2 lines you wrote in the count. You get down to line 4, you get confused. Well, you have a guide back up on the first 2 lines. But yeah, it becomes a crutch. If you write in the count for every single measure, you have those kids that start just reading their own handwriting and they're not looking at the code.
Right.
Yeah, so it was really important to me that we didn't have count written throughout, and that we aren't asking the band directors to have them write it for everything, because then you're just crutching your kids.
Yeah.
So Kiko, I want you to show them the way we go through triplets and 6/8. Like it was so logical to me. And
okay, let me find it. So
most books do 6/8 first, right? And then they do triplets.
Quarter note triplets, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's how we did 6/8, and we did it both ways because I think this is really important. Like, we have the method that most beginner books have where you're teaching your kids to think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, we use essential elements, and that's what they teach in there. But that's not how I'm going to teach them to count it, because I mean, the way at least I was taught, like when I was taking flute lessons back in the day, like this is how you counted something that was in slow 6/8. You were thinking about bigger beats. There were going to be, 30-second notes thrown in there later. So you were counting in those bigger 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But most of us, when we're getting into 6/8, let's be real, we're playing Sousa. And so when we're playing Sousa, we're thinking about our 2-beat subdivision. And so that's when we start showing them, you can count it this way, and this is cool. But we also have this option where we're thinking about it in 2 larger beats with the lolly subdivision. And the 6/8 is taught, let me show you, that happens in lesson 17. That happens in lesson 17. And then the very next lesson is going through, and it's teaching them that, hey, triplets are the exact same thing, even if you see it in traditional 4/4 or 2/4 or 3/4 meter. It's the exact same thing. Hey, they look exactly the same way. You're going to count them exactly the same way. Consistency is everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we've got these ensemble pages throughout. The left page is always going to be like a teaching page where your kids are going to learn the actual concept. And then they have ensemble pages on the right side to take what they learned on the unison counting and apply it in a way that your kids are in more of a band or orchestra setting, where they're having to listen to other parts and not get confused.
And like toward the end of that one, they'll notice like that's where we start to kind of juxtapose well, not juxtapose, but we start to add in the dotted A 16th rhythms with.
Oh yeah, this one gets pretty.
Rhythms.
You got a little bit of everything here, which makes me happy. When their brains are fried, it was a good lesson.
Right.
It goes through, even on the triplets, when you get down to the bottom, we have them in cut time. So the kids are seeing it in all sorts of ways. I think it's really important to teach your kids cut time in beginner band because, so much music that you end up seeing in 7th and 8th grade utilizes it. So why not go ahead and teach it early on? So like in lesson 16, it's already going through and it's teaching really basic cut time stuff. Just super basic on easy things that just introduces the concept. And then
well, and I should mention, like when we started cut time, that was one of my Destroying Lives pages, right? Because I started going like, they already know how to count. And you're the one that had me back off of that a lot. You said, look, it's cut time. We want to just get simple. We want to get them the basic concepts of it. And it doesn't have to be all this. If you understand
the basic concept, then the harder stuff makes sense because you understand the concept and then you can build off of it.
Right.
Yep. And then we get again, like by the time we get to the end, we're going through the advanced stuff. And then like by lesson 20, you're ready to play undertow.
Right, exactly.
Perfect. There was a clarification question about when y'all were talking about teaching the 6/8 section about the arrows. The question was, why is it not down on 1, down on 2? It's down on 1, up on 2 is what that looked like.
Let me see. Let me pull that back up.
Mm-hmm. I think you said it was lesson 17.
Okay, so there on the one that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, no arrows. Because we teach the kids that every time you say a number, your foot's going to be down. If it's a number, your foot's down. Now, when we get to the duple version, oh, that's a mistake.
Where? Let me see.
Check that out. Hey, somebody, whoever asked that question.
Wait, which one's a mistake?
From Wendy's. Check this out. It should be down and down. Down and down, and that's an up on
not if they're counting quickly, because it would be 1 lolly, 2 lolly. Oh, so you're trying. The thing is,
1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly. Yeah, it should be. So whoever caught that, you're a smart cookie.
Okay.
You are. You get praise.
Yep. Yeah. So that's actually a mistake.
All right.
That's what
yeah. So that's
kids,
wrong.
the book was written by hamsters, and that hamsters don't know where down arrows go. And then their kids are like, "Oh my gosh, Darcy Vogt Williams and Brian Balmages are small rodents."
I didn't write that page.
Yeah, no, that's a flat out mistake.
All right.
Yeah, how about that?
Good catch.
Cool. So there were also questions. We went over this a little bit in your talk beforehand, but just to circle back, questions about whether this is something that you do simply by speaking or sizzling, or whether you are doing this with pitches.
I think when we're using this kind of stuff with my kids, we are primarily going through and speaking or sizzling or air playing. We do go back and play the charts though. So we'll say, okay, we've counted it, we've taught it, we've air played it. Now let's go back and play it on concert F. Or, if it's a particularly fun day, let's go back and do it on concert B natural. Let's have a good time today. But we'll go through and we'll play this stuff. Something else that I've done is I'll have the kids go through and play it on each note of the scale. So all of line 1 is going to be concert B flat. All of line 2 is going to be concert C. And we'll go down our B flat scale, playing each line on a new pitch, so that they have something else to think about. I've gone through, and if there's chordal things that I'm working on, I've had my top band go through and open up to a chart, and we'll practice tuning chords while playing rhythm stuff. I mean, anything to really drive rhythm home with the kids on a daily basis, on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be every single day as long as it's regular. But like with the beginners, I am primarily doing this on spoken or sizzling or whatnot.
I wanted to mention also, you do some breath impulse stuff with your kids.
I do. I teach the kids that we are going to breath impulse the 8th note subdivision from day 1. So like, we learned that if you're going to count a measure of quarter notes, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, which sounds stupid and is extremely effective because it's hitting home the idea of the fact that they need to be feeling that internal subdivision from the very beginning. I don't tell them that's what we're doing. I just tell them that you say a number on the down and you put a pulse on your voice with the up. And then, later on we talk about what we're actually doing. But, from day 1 that the kids are counting, they're already thinking those internal pulses while they count.
And we should be very clear that none of your bands play that way. And so I think people worry that they're going to have hearing woo, 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 and nope. None of your bands play that way. There's
just tell them don't do it.
Yeah.
We're like magicians and wizards. Just tell your kids not to do it, and guess what? They won't.
Right. So that was a big thing. We had never really talked about that, how to get them to understand the subdivision while they're sustaining.
Yeah.
Cool. We had questions about using this with different age levels. So there was a question about using it with high school. There's a question about using it with elementary. And again, we talked a little bit about this before, but how would you adjust it? Do you think it fits with other age groups other than middle school?
I think that
does it?
I think it's applicable with everybody, and I think sometimes we give our kids too much credit. In that, if you go back, I would be hard pressed to believe that if you at the beginning of the year with your high school band said, we're going to go back to the beginning of this and we're going to play through chart 1 and 2, someone's going to make a mistake, guaranteed. Someone's going to. There is nothing wrong with going back and reviewing basics with your kids. And I think that, like, especially when they get I mean, I find myself sometimes assuming that my top band kids understand things or remember things that they don't. And then I go back and discover, I mean, heck, when we start getting ready for sight reading, we break out the charts all the time and go through that stuff. And, you know, I would be lying if I say my kids don't mess up on the half note and quarter note things. They do. You know, they're kids, their brains turn on. It doesn't always have to be hard for your upper level kids. Sometimes you go back and check for stuff on, check for understanding on stuff that seems easy just to see if their brains are on.
Yeah, and how many times, the other great application for this, especially if you want to say what's the application for middle school, high school, is time. We talk about rhythm all the time, but how many high school groups? I had a high school group, I was in Illinois, and great kids, and they played well, but every time we got into this rhythm, dot 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 dot, you would hear dot 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 dot, and it would get behind, right? Or they might have like dee da dee ba 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 ba, and every time you'd hear bum bum ba 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 ba, and it would be behind. And so a book like this is not just great for rhythm, but it's great to really reinforce time. And and I actually mentioned, yeah, and I think most people assume this, but you have this met on all the time when you're doing
time.
stuff.
We have the Texas metronome going all the time. We do. We are very much about teaching precision of rhythm, and that things, you know, your band will sound more musical if it happens in time. You can make it happen better.
I mean, you posted that video of your first run through of the Christmas piece with your beginner band, all like 8 million of them, or whatever it was. And the time was quite good. You did it first time with the Met, right? With them all playing with the Met. And then the second time you took that off and you're like, okay, here we go. They all maintained time. And then of course you approach all these things with
any of us that have taught kids ever know, like, kids aren't built in with pulse. They're not, which, by the way, if any of you have ever thought about what this heartbeat is, pulse is the heartbeat of music. And when Brian showed me this cover, I was in love with it. But yeah, like kids don't come in with built-in pulse. I have a kid in my band right now. I'm going to avoid saying what they play or what instrument they are or what grade they are. I have a kid in my band right now, played their solo for my class yesterday, a class 1 solo, absolutely phenomenal, completely gorgeous, wonderful. The first week of 6th grade, I was like, oh my gosh, this kid is a hot mess. Like, they can't even tap their foot with the metronome. But like, this is pulse is a skill that you do teach, and using the metronome is going to build that internal steady pulse way faster than if you're just assuming the kids are gonna, I don't know. We could go off on the metronome conversation and then I would have half of America hating me instantly. But yes, I am a firm believer in the metronome from the very beginning to build that natural pulse that our kids don't always come to us with.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think that's cool. Most people think like they either have it or they don't.
Mm-hmm.
It can be built. This kid, it was built for him because he certainly didn't have it when he got to us. And now he's, you know, rocking a class 1.
Yay.
He or she.
He or she. Yeah.
Perfect. The last question that I've got here from our participants is, since we're at the end of the school year, are there things that I can use to implement now with this?
Absolutely. I don't think that there's, I don't think that time of year has anything to do with fundamentals. Like, I don't think, or I hope that we don't like suddenly stop working long tones just because it's May, or stop working technique just because it's May. And, you know, my biggest platform, or, you know, one of the things that I try to hit home as often as possible is rhythm is a fundamental. And so what fundamental do you think is unimportant? Like, the whole word fundamental is that like it's necessary. And I don't think that there is, anything in here, anything rhythmic is prime all year, every day, every week. Like, I don't think there's a season for teaching any of our fundamentals. You know, we might build off of it. And now that we're later in the year, those of us that started using this stuff earlier in the year, sure, we're probably further along in the book. But I don't think that there's ever a time where this would not be applicable. And going back and
some directors that said that they were going to use, I talked to directors that said they were going to use this kind of like this is a preview of what we're going to continue with next year. But they even, I mean, towards the end of the year, kids are getting tired, so they start introducing the games, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to introduce some games now, and suddenly the kids are like, oh, this is really cool. And then it's a way to get them excited about, hey, we're going to continue this next year. We're going to have more competitions. We're going to have more of this. We're going to have more of this. And I think the kids started to get a lot more excited. Of course, you can apply it to the music that you're using. I'd also like to mention, I know time of the year and we're getting towards the end. We've got the concerts to prepare for. But something that so we talked about how your band went to Midwest, right? And then a good friend of both of ours, Robert Herring, his band a couple years ago also went to Midwest. I was in both of your band rooms when that was all going down, like when you're getting close to playing. And in both cases, we were a month or two away from Midwest, right? When most people were like, we've got to pound on the music. We've got to go, we got to go. And in both cases, you guys just hung out on, I remember I was in Robert's room and he spent 10 minutes on Concert F.
Yeah.
He flew me down and they were working on a piece that I wrote for them, but he would not go on until that Concert F was locked in the way it should be. Yeah. And same thing with Darcy. You were working on something, and I think it was Concert F also, but there was also a rhythmic thing, if I remember. And you spent 10, 15 minutes no, we're going to, and you wouldn't let it go because you needed the fundamental to be there before you would go back to the music. And that was a month, 2 months, whatever, before this massive international performance. So I think people don't need to worry about the time of year. And I think you can start this anytime.
Yes.
Awesome.
Totally.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys both for contributing today and being our fabulous guests. I hope everybody who's watching has really enjoyed. I'm just going to leave you with a couple quick...
She didn't like that, sorry.
Huh?
My dog. She didn't like that. I was trying to... She didn't like that.
I'll leave you with a couple quick notes. So like we talked about, Count Me In is available in SmartMusic. So if you want to use it in SmartMusic as well as having this fabulous physical book in your students' hands, you can try it out for free with a free trial of SmartMusic. You've got 30 days to totally mess around and do whatever you want. You can go to smartmusic.com/sign-up-free to get going with that. So that's easy. Also, if you want to go back and listen to this all over again or check out any of our other webinars, you can do so by going on to youtube.com/smartmusic. We have a huge amount of webinars that are archived there, and all of our new webinars will go there as well. So you can keep up to date and get some new tips from fabulous people like Brian and Darcy, as well as some information about how to work with SmartMusic from some of our own people. So that's it for today. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Brian and Darcy, for contributing and chatting with us today. And
absolutely. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. You guys are just stellar, so we're happy to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, have a great day, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.
Cool.
Sounds good. Until the next one.
Till the next one. Perfect. Bye,
Okay.
guys.